Hello.
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 Hi there.
Hello and welcome to the RadioTimes.com Doctor Who podcast. My name's Hugh.
And I'm Morgan.
And this week we're talking about Orphan 55, episode 3 of Doctor Who series 12. Now, beforehand we'd been talked to a bit about this episode by the cast, said it was very scary. Monsters that they found quite scary on set because they're physical monsters rather than CGI ones that they have to look for.
Some of the scariest monsters ever was how they were built.
Yep. And in reality, I didn't find them as scary as I had hoped to.
No, there was a lot of hype around this episode. You know, as I said, they were talking it up. It was going to be one of the scariest episodes of all time, and I was hoping it would rank alongside, the likes of Blink at midnight. And I have to say, I don't want to be negative, but I did find this episode quite disappointing. It put me in mind of, first of all, it felt very much like a throwback to the previous series, whereas Spyfall had felt a lot more fresh and like this series was driving in a new and exciting direction. This felt like the weaker parts of the 2018 series.
It kind of reminded me a little bit of episodes like The Ghost Monument and the Battle of Ranskor Av Kolos.
I was about to say the filler episodes, but actually Ranskor Av Kolos was the finale.
Yeah, and the second episode was quite important as well. But yeah, anyway, we should talk. It's funny you mentioned Midnight because there's a couple of sort of setting similarities, if not story similarities. Like that episode, this is set on a deadly world which has an alien spa sitting on it, although we find out a little bit later on, and the Doctor and crew end up there after winning some coupons which they assemble into a cube. It's not a hypercube. We thought it was a Time Lord hypercube because there was a picture released of Graham holding a glowing cube.
That might have been more interesting.
Yeah, but sadly it didn't happen, although he assembled it a bit like a hypercube, so I like to think it's somehow influenced. And yeah, they end up there, and yeah, I mean, one of the things I did like about this episode is it's kind of a base under siege, which is a classic Doctor Who style. They did seem to try and fiddle with the format a little, because you'd expect the Doctor and crew to kind of find this place, chill out a bit. There's maybe a little something goes on, and the Doctor's like, oh, interesting. In this case, it all happens at the start. As soon as they get there, there's this huge attack. They dispel the attack, and then other stuff starts to happen.
And then it's essentially one big chase sequence.
Yeah.
Although they did avoid having a Bradley Walsh chase gag.
Yes, they did. For you, the chase is over.
It's a shame.
But I will say, thinking about it though, I like that they fiddle with the format a bit. But the format kind of also is there for a reason. And I kind of feel like we missed seeing the sort of TARDIS team in their downtime. Like, I feel like it would have been nice to see, especially at the moment, the Doctor's kind of emotionally vulnerable. It would have been nice to see her sort of hanging out with these people, because we don't really see them do that very much. We've always seen them kind of in the middle of something or doing something else.
At the tail end of an adventure.
Yeah, we never really see them having fun and like enjoying themselves, I think, anyway.
And you actually had a really good idea of how this episode could have played into the Timeless Child arc.
Yeah, well, I thought it was kind of interesting because as we later find out in the episode that the planet they're on, the Orphan planet, the irradiated deadly world, it's actually Earth. Planet of the Apes. It was Earth all along.
They blew it up. Those maniacs.
You monsters. And yeah, basically, I thought that's an obvious thing. The Doctor's just had her planet destroyed and has had it destroyed before. So that kind of felt like an interesting parallel. And I thought that you could have started the episode with the Doctor talking to Yaz while they were chilling out, maybe about her home world. As being, oh, is your home planet anything like this? And she's like, no. Does all the sort of like, ooh, the red grass and the Tower of Delirium,
the orange sky,
yeah, all that stuff,
silver leaves,
singing mountains, whatever. And then basically kind of talk a bit about that, and then maybe and Yaz sort of says stuff. Oh, Earth, so blah blah blah. Talks a bit about Earth. And then maybe the Doctor's about to sort of say what's happened and a bit of that thing. And then something starts to go wrong. The Doctor starts to investigate. Because then that would kind of seed the Earth thing, which to me kind of felt a bit out of nowhere when it does turn out they're on Earth. And also would, like you said, tie it back to the Timeless Child arc and the destruction of Gallifrey without actually having to advance that plot. That said, it's easy for me to sit here and say, why didn't they do it this way? Because it might have been, if they had, I'd be sitting here being like, oh, what a terrible idea.
Well, we're Doctor Who fans, so we absolutely would have been.
Yeah.
But the thing, one of my big problems with this episode was, it's one long chase sequence, which isn't a problem, but because there is so little setup, as you say, we don't really get to know the supporting characters ahead of time. And if you're going to do an episode that's just running away from monsters and getting caught by the monsters and who's going to survive, you need to care about the characters. And the supporting cast, we just don't care about. No fault of the actors particularly, but because we don't know them well enough, because there hasn't been enough setup and exposition and enough backstory.
Totally. I mean, there's a reason that in recent years, these kind of base stories are usually two-parters, because it gives you a bit more time to get to know people. Like, obviously, the Impossible Planet and the Satan Pit episodes.
Fantastic story.
Really great episodes. And you do actually care about those characters and you get on with them. And, even Under the Lake Before the Flood, I think there's a bit more of that. And Voyage of the Damned, which is obviously a one-off, but it's a longer, it's a Christmas special. David Tennant at the time didn't have any companions. Jodie Whittaker has 3. So there's a big cast.
Well, this is it as well. Like, Doctor Who already has 4 leads, and we've talked about how in the past it's sometimes struggled to juggle just those. And Spyfall actually did a really good job of that by splitting them up. This doesn't. It more or less, for the most part, keeps them all together.
Yeah, Ryan sort of goes off at some point. But then that's about it. Yeah, and they just introduce all these new characters. There's
so
Kane,
many supporting characters.
There's Nevi, there's Silas, there's Vilma, there's Benny, there's Kane's sidekick, there's Hyphen with a 3. There's a couple of other people, I think. Bella.
Yeah. Hyphen, who I just couldn't get out of my mind, looks exactly like Barf, John Candy's character from Spaceballs. It's uncanny.
Yeah.
But as you say, there's so many characters, and again, no fault of the actors. I thought there were some nice guest performances in there. Laura Fraser, Llewyn Lloyd as Silas, but they just kind of get lost, and you don't have any attachment to these characters. So when they do get killed off one by one, you don't really care.
No, and it's funny because the episode sort of jumped ahead, I felt, to sort of acting like we should know and care about these characters. Like there's this bit where they're chatting in the in the car, the van thing, the space van,
the transport.
Yeah, the transport.
That sounds sci-fi.
Yeah, and Bella says something like, "Oh, my mum, she makes Nevi look like Parent of the Year," and I was about size. I was like, "Hush! Like, you just met this guy." Like it felt weird. Like I don't feel like we as an audience had that kind of familiarity with Nevi's a really bad parent, or like, oh, Silas is this age, and like I felt like I hadn't seen those characters speak ever, so it's sort of weird. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it was a longer episode that was cut down quite severely to make time, and that's why it felt rushed in that way. I don't know.
There's a lot of odd stuff in it. I mean, we should mention. I mean, part of the thing that sort of stirs this chase sequence is that Benni, who is I can't remember the actor's name, but he's one of the new characters.
Cole Farrell.
Cole Farrell, thank you.
No relation to Colin Farrell,
yes.
as far as I could tell.
He basically is one of the elderly guests, and he's on an oxygen tank, and he's sort of going to propose to his longtime partner. I want to say Vilma, not Velma, and not Wilma. Vilma, who's actually played by Julia Elizabeth Fogel, who is mother to Ben Fogel, who UK listeners will know as a sort of TV
Cole Farrell is not related to Colin Farrell, but Julia Fogel is related to Ben Fogel.
Exactly. Anyway, I forgot his name. Benny does a very stupid thing when they're being attacked by aliens. He's like, oh, someone's lost their hat. I'll go and get the hat. A bit Indiana Jones, I suppose. And then he gets abducted, and then the whole story is, oh, we've got to go and get Benny. Oh, where's Benny?
Benny.
And then the thing is, at the end, it's sort of revealed that he like knocks on the outside and he sort of talks to Vilma and begs for death and says, oh, will you marry me? And then I thought this was going to lead to a big twist where like the monsters were people, which they sort of were, we found out later on, but they had like turned him into one of them. But it turns out actually they'd just been carrying him around, and they hadn't done that for any other victims who they killed with this. They carried him around and his oxygen tank.
They do touch on that a little bit. They say, oh, they were having fun with him, but
I was thinking about it though. Did they like cradle him in their arms? Did they like have a stretcher? Did they just drag him along the floor? Who carried the oxygen tank? Right. It was like, I mean, physically, he couldn't survive without the oxygen.
How much fun were they really having?
Pretty young. They were like, God, this. We thought this would be a bit of maiming, but it's a lot of admin, a lot of legwork. Jeez. So there was just a lot of things in the episode I found a bit bizarre.
And speaking about the monsters as well, the Dregs, literally the Dregs of humanity.
Yeah. I thought it was funny actually that they called them the Dregs, and they previously had a monster in the Ghost Monument called the Remnants.
Oh yeah.
So it's just scraping the barrel, one way or another.
But I one thing I do like about this series so far is how we're getting actual monsters. We're getting alien nasties, because a lot of the monsters in Series 11 were sort of misunderstood alien creatures. They weren't really bad guys, and that's fine once or twice. But it got so that
it didn't feel like it was a sort of intentional theme necessarily. I mean, maybe it was, but it kind of just felt like that just happened to be what it was every time.
And with a few exceptions, mostly they were these misunderstood alien creatures, and it just felt like you always knew where the story was going. So I quite like that we've gone back to the kind of classic Who feel of just real bad alien monsters. And I actually thought how they looked was okay.
Yeah.
I thought the design was pretty good. So you can see why the cast maybe thought they were going to be
in person
really
they'd be terrifying.
Yeah.
Genuinely. On screen?
I think a lot of the blame goes to the direction, if I'm being honest. I don't think they were sort of handled particularly well on screen. I don't think they were shot particularly well. Possibly it's in the script, but they're in sort of very stark daylight a lot of the time, which kind of highlights any slight flaws that the costumes may have.
And also they're just sort of standing around a lot of the time, and because they're just guys in costumes and
just sort of wobbling.
Yeah, and I feel like you could have done it a little bit more like like Jaws, where you just sort of keep them out of sight and reveal them later. Like, I was surprised they revealed them as early as they did. And then also, the Doctor doesn't defeat the monsters. The Doctor just leaves.
Yeah, the final scene I found odd for a couple of reasons. One, I found the Doctor's lecture a bit strange. I mean, the fact that she's got sort of, admonishing her companions didn't feel very doctory to me. And also, as you say, the fact that the Doctor doesn't really solve anything. The TARDIS team just sort of zap back to
they
leave.
They leave a couple of people to die, and like that's just it. And I'm just sort of like, doesn't the Doctor have a remote control on the TARDIS anyway? Like, I mean, look, you can sort of go into too much detail on these things, but I'm not going to say the Doctor should just call the TARDIS down. Maybe she couldn't. There was maybe a reason, but yeah, it did feel a bit odd. Also, like her whole speech, I thought was a bit strange. I don't think it's wrong exactly. I once spoke to a TV writer in America who told me that he finds it bizarre that he can write a cop show where they have like the lawyers walking onto the crime scenes and doing whatever, and nobody bats an eyelid. But with sci-fi, you have, oh no, that's not how it works. Sci-fi, time travel isn't real.
Right.
So there aren't rules of time travel, but there are, that we've invented.
Yeah.
But anyway, one of the things Doctor Who's always done is talked about fixed points in time and fluid points in time. Future can be
changing
rewritten.
History.
Yeah. The odd thing in this episode was that they go to Earth and Earth's been nuked, irradiated, uninhabitable, and they're all feeling a bit down in the mouth about it. And the Doctor says, oh no, this is just one possible future. Maybe it'll go differently. And I don't think Doctor Who's ever presented it as like where you are is like, unless there's already been some interference by them or by another time traveller, I don't think they've ever presented as where they are as a possibility.
Right. It all gets very murky, but because Doctor Who has presented potential futures.
Yeah.
But in Pyramids of Mars and the classic series, the Doctor takes Sarah Jane to an alternate or what will be 1980.
Yeah.
Because I think she says, well, why don't we just leave? Because we know that this doesn't happen in the past because the present is fine. Yeah. And then he takes her to 1980 and things have changed and it's apocalyptic wasteland. Yeah. Having said that, I think it robs Doctor Who of some of the peril. If you say, well, this is just one possible future. It has to be the future unless you act.
Yeah, definitely. I think it needs to be something that Doctor Who or Aliens or something has changed. Because otherwise it's like, well, they could go there one day and it's like that. And then they could go there another day and it wouldn't be like that anymore. I know it's a bit abstract, but I just don't think it quite works with how the series has presented it. Like, I think things are in a certain way until something changes them is kind of how I've always seen it. But maybe that's just me. Also, I'm not sure how it ties in with what we've seen of Earth's kind of history in Doctor Who of constantly being destroyed and brought back and stuff.
Yeah, well, despite what was sort of insisted upon in the very early days of Doctor Who that you couldn't change history, I think it's fairly well established that history is fluid. It can be changed by action, as the Doctor says. And throughout, because Doctor Who's been running now for something almost 57 years, so of course we've seen all kinds of different interpretations of what happens to Earth in the future. Very few of the outcomes are good. If I'm honest, I think if you look into it, there's been two, or there will be rather, sort of messes up the tenses, 2 Dalek invasions. The Earth gets devastated by solar flares. Humanity is almost extinguished several times. We leave and come back to Earth multiple times, and then eventually, of course, the Earth is obliterated by the sun in the year 5 billion, which we saw in The End of the World.
Yeah, and then they make a new one.
Yes, and then they make new. I'm not even thinking about New Earth. That's like a whole other thing. And humanity sort of devolves into a primitive race multiple times across the series, and then its ultimate fate is to become possibly the future kind, also the Toclophane, which you see.
Same story.
Yes, that's the same story. There's a lot going on in Doctor Who if you look into it in terms of the ultimate fate of Earth and mankind.
And also occasionally they've done this sort of big reboot where there's been an explosion in time or whatever, and then a lot of stuff has been wiped from canon, but not everything.
Right. So it's not entirely clear now how much of what I just said still counts.
But I think, it's very confusing if you try and be super, super technical and nerdy with this. And as we say, time travel isn't real. So who knows how it would work.
This isn't real, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. But no, it is sort of, you do sort of wonder about it. And if you're going to use the sort of like the point of, oh my God, it was Earth all along, Planet of the Apes style, I think like it kind of didn't quite line up with the stuff we've seen before. I mean, maybe Earth gets fixed again and then gets destroyed by a solar flare.
Well, if you try and sort of chronologically chart everything that happens, Earth does get destroyed and rebuilt several times.
Yeah.
So possibly it recovers from the state it's in Orphan 55.
Yeah, but then that's kind of a downer that could just, and also it becomes Earth again and the humans are back on it, and
then it's like, well, that takes away the sort of the peril.
Yeah, it's a bit weird, but I mean, it's one of these things where this might sound very nerdy to anyone listening, and maybe we're going into it.
That's what they're tuning in for.
Maybe you're right. But yeah, no, I think there were some bits I liked in this episode. I liked, I quite liked the beginning. I liked the fact that the Doctor was still a bit concerned about what she'd found out within the Master and everything. You know, as Yaz says, she's been a bit mardy. You know, I kind of liked that.
Yeah, that it touched on the Timeless Child arc, even though it didn't advance it.
Yeah, I liked that, and I kind of like it felt like didn't feel completely isolated, which is nice. But I felt like they could have done a bit more with that. Like the Doctor's mood wasn't really an important part of the episode.
No,
like. You know, would have stayed the same. And I liked, Bradley Walsh doing his sort of Bradley Walsh thing.
Bradley Walsh was on fire in that first few scenes. Like Graham just having a great time at the holiday resort. I really, really enjoyed. And I liked as well that we see him express, because, he had the sort of tumultuous relationship with Ryan in Series 11. I like that we see them really bonding here, and they have quite a sweet relationship now where Graham's really concerned about Ryan when he thinks something bad might have happened to him. Yeah,
totally. And I was wondering, it was nice to see Ryan sort of, try and establish some sort of romantic contact with somebody. Turns out she was kind of like a murderer, I guess. It was a very odd thing.
No luck in love for Ryan.
Yeah, she was sort of like, it was Bella who she was sort of like, oh, my mum left me, so I'm going to kill a lot of people. It was hard to sort of find a lot of sympathy for that. It felt a bit out of nowhere, but I kind of figured she was probably her daughter when she was
right.
Like, oh.
Well, I mean, Bella probably died anyway, so.
Yeah, they all died. Everyone died except Nevi and Silas and the TARDIS lot. Everyone else died.
That's the main thing, though, is that Roger from his Dark Materials survived.
Back on Sunday nights on BBC One, living it up. Good to know. I mean, there's not like loads of big arcs stuff to talk about in this episode, and I think overall, like we say, I think it was a bit of a disappointment, especially after. We'd heard it was so scary. I was quite looking forward to that.
And especially after such a strong two-part opener with Spyfall Part 1 and Part 2.
And also, Ed Heim, who wrote this episode, wrote It Takes You Away, which wasn't my favourite, but I know a lot of people really liked that episode. And also, I did think it had a lot of really, really interesting ideas.
Yeah, if anything, that had too much going on.
Yeah.
And this almost has the opposite problem. It has too little going on in the sense that there's not enough setup, there's not enough time spent setting up the characters before we just go on this mad dash to the finish.
Totally, yeah. And I think there's also, weirdly, there's not enough going on, and there's also a lot going on. Do you know what I mean? Like, a lot happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It's
very little of consequence.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to next week because it's Nikola Tesla's Night of Terror.
I love the title.
Yeah, which is a bit of a tongue twister, which may be the point. And, we're going to it's a historical episode kind of highlighting a slightly lesser known figure, at least in this country. I mean, he's pretty famous, but Nikola Tesla's kind of the father of alternating current electricity. And Thomas Edison's in it, and, some good guest stars, Gordon Vishnick, and did I say Robert Glenister?
You didn't.
Robert Glenister. And there should be, and Anjali Mahindra, formerly of the Sarah Jane Adventures, and Bradley Walsh's former co-star on the Sarah Jane Adventures. He was in an episode.
But looking totally unrecognisable.
Yeah, she's sort of like tarantula lady or something. So that should be pretty fun. So we'll be back next week chatting about that.
Hopefully being a bit more positive.
Yes, and please do let us know in the comments what you thought of Orphan 55. Maybe you loved it. Maybe you disliked it even more than we did. Who knows? But yeah, please do let us know. And for everything else, read all our Doctor Who content on radiotimes.com. I've been Hugh.
I've been Morgan.
And thanks for listening.